Happy Thursday, everybody. My name is Michael Gibson, and I'm talking about why I go to church. And I'm calling this, it's okay to be second. You don't have to be first. And you don't have to be even prepared all the time. One of the main reasons that I love the Bible is because it's rich. You may want to call it the scriptures, however you want to describe it, but I believe that it is a very rich document, and it has a lot of life lessons in it. Some people don't want to prescribe to anything that is related to faith-based just because they see men doing wrong things, but men doing wrong things has nothing to do with the Creator God. They're not equivalent. They're not on the same plane. But the reason why I said I go to church and the power of the second, and that you don't have to be first. I think one of the greatest tricks, or one of the most harmful things in this world, is to tell someone that they have to be first, because being first sometimes can stop you from doing a thing because you think you have to be first. You think that if you weren't first, then you're not good enough. If you didn't think of the idea first, then there's no need for me to put my idea or my thoughts out into the ethos, out into the environment. But nothing could really be farther from the truth. It's okay to be second. And when I read the word, God relays this story over and over and over and over. So if you look and you read the scriptures, Adam was first, but the second Adam, Christ, was better. Adam was first, but the second Adam was better. There was a priest. We know that Jesus, once he went to the cross, he became our high priest, but he came in the order of Melchizedek. Jesus wasn't even the first. Even when Jesus came onto the scene and they said that, he was the way, the truth, and the life, and that he was a light, he had a cousin, John, that was born before him, that came to bear witness of the light. So I just want to encourage you, don't get trapped in being that you got to be first, because first doesn't always mean better. First doesn't always mean that second is not enough, because Jesus was second. John came and he bore witness of the light. So John actually was a light bringer when he was here, before Jesus got here, before Jesus got on the scene, before Jesus was actually mature enough to minister. So you can be second. It's okay. Look at King David. He wasn't the first of the children. He was not first. Actually, he was an afterthought. They came through and they looked through all these different men, and Samuel was like, nah, man, that ain't the one. There's somebody else that needs to be brought out here. So it's very important for you to recognize, just because you're not first, just because you don't have the biggest stature, just because you wasn't someone's first option, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't go forward. It doesn't mean that you should feel less than, because God has shown time and time again that being first doesn't matter. Being second doesn't matter. If you look at Jacob, he wasn't first. He was second. It wasn't his birthright. He wasn't the first, but he got the birthright and he got the blessing. If you look at Isaac and even Ishmael, Isaac wasn't the first. He was the second child, and he got all the blessings. He got the birthright. Look at Joseph. My man was like 12. He was the youngest. He was the baby. So there's many times in this word that being first didn't help them, because the birthright doesn't always go to the firstborn, even though we want to believe that all the rights go to the firstborn. Sometimes the youngest got the blessing. Actually, in many cases, the most obedient got the blessing. And that's why I keep reading this word, because I keep learning something new every time I dive into this word. Every time I open up this book, God can reveal something new to me. And the reason why I believe I get new revelations about the depth and the breadth of God is because I'm open. I'm open and I'm expecting to get something new from God. And you know, even when you get outside the Bible, if you look at the natural realm, Walt Disney, he was fired from his company because they said he wasn't creative enough. This is probably one of the most creative men that the world has ever known, with all his movies, his Mickey Mouse, his Goofy, and all this other stuff. But the company that he was with said he wasn't creative enough, said that he wasn't good enough. Oprah Winfrey, yeah, the Empire Oprah owned network, the television show that she was on, they said that she wasn't good enough. They said that she couldn't cut the mustard. They said that she was too heavy, that she wasn't beautiful enough. And look where she's at. She was second fiddle to Donahue. Yeah, I might be dating myself, but she was second fiddle to Phil Donahue. Where's she at? Where he at? So there is something powerful about being second. But the reason why second can become so powerful, or even third or fourth, is because there is a belief that there is greater on the inside of you. And when I go to church, God reminds me that there is greater on the inside of me. So even when someone doesn't see the shine that's in the inside of me, they can't see the light, it doesn't mean that I don't have a light. If someone doesn't see the greatness that I have, it doesn't mean that I'm not great. It might just mean I'm in the wrong place. I'm not in the right position. So I go to church because it helps me get into the right position, and that I don't have to worry about if I was chosen first, or if I'm the 12th son, or if I'm the second born. All of that is irrelevant. When you're with Christ, if you stay in your lane and you begin to look inward and then you look upward and you move forward, God will position you to be in the right place at the right time to be successful. But in order to be successful, you can never give up. You can never get in. You can't listen to those critics, the ones that keep saying that you won't make it. You're not good enough. You're good enough. If you got breath in your body, you're good enough. If you got eyes to see, legs to walk, ears to hear, a brain to think, you're good enough. Even if you don't have one of those things, you're good enough. Just imagine if Stevie Wonder would have said, I'm not good enough because I can't see the keys. But God anointed that man that his ears could hear. He didn't need eyes to see because he had ears that could hear. Or even Ray Charles. There's so many things that you can do if you believe in who you are and what has created you and who you have been created to be. You don't have to be first at it. 409, it chose his name because it was turned down 408 times. There was something so powerful. Hey, Chris, there was something so powerful in believing in who you are and what God has created you to be. Just because you're not chosen the first time, it doesn't mean to give up. It doesn't mean that you need to give up. Even if you look at sports, the great Tom Brady, he was in a 6th round draft pick. He wasn't starting on his team, but he was ready when his number was called. Brett Favre, he was ready when his number was called. Steve Young, he sat behind Joe Montana. He wasn't the first choice, but then he became their choice. And this is why I keep diving in the word. And you might be saying, why are you mixing the two? Because the stories that I see, that I read in the scriptures, play out in the natural. Many times you're not the first choice. It doesn't mean that you will never get a chance to be successful. It doesn't mean that you can't be successful. It doesn't mean that there's not greatness on the inside of you. I look at some of the greatest athletes that I know. Jerry Rice, he went to Mississippi Valley State. That was like some podunk college no one ever heard of. But he became one of the greatest wide receivers that we ever seen. Look at Michael Jeffrey Jordan. He didn't make his high school basketball teams, and he became one of the greatest basketball players, if not the greatest basketball player that we've ever seen. So just because you're not the first choice doesn't mean that you're not a choice. Just because you didn't make the first team, just because you didn't make the first team the first time, it doesn't mean that you give up. It doesn't mean that you don't keep grinding. It doesn't mean that you don't keep working. Because when you keep working, greatness finds greatness. Greatness is basically never giving up, believing in yourself, and keep moving forward, and not letting failure be a stumbling block, not letting failure make you turn back, Because failure is just preparation for greatness. Failure is just saying this didn't work this time, that it can work better the next time. That's why I keep going, because God keeps letting me know that I've put something great on the inside of each and every individual that I created. There is something special about all of us. Sometimes people just can't see how special or how great you are. I always reference Dr. Seuss because he was turned down 26 times. And this dude wrote The Cat in the Hat, Wacky Wednesday, and all these books that I've been reading to my kids for the last 5 years. I've had enough Dr. Seuss to last me a lifetime. But just think, he had to go one more time. He had to push past one more additional barrier to be successful. Look at Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban was fired from his job. He had to go one more time. He had to push one more thing. Dude is worth like a couple $2 billion. Just imagine if Mark Cuban would have gave up. Just imagine if Steve Jobs would have not came back to Apple after they let the man go. After he made the Mac computer, they let that man go. Then he came back to Apple. Then he made the iPod, which became the iPad, which became the iPad mini, which runs all of our world with the iPhone. Just imagine if that dude gave up because his company gave up on him. Or Bill Gates with his operating system. Don't ever give up. Believe that if God created you, there was something awesome on the inside of you. Just because someone's inability to see your value does not mean that you are not valuable. Second is okay. Third is okay. Fourth is okay. Because God has called all of us to a lane of greatness. God has called all of us to be important. And the reason why I love sports so much, because I find it comical. Because it's only in our natural world that the common folk, as I like to say, when they get fired, we say, wow, it's the end of the world. But I'm amazed because football coaches get fired every single day and they get rehired. They don't stop coaching because they got fired. I mean, my man, Wade Phillips, dude has been fired like a gazillion times and he's still in the league. He's a defensive coordinator. He still got a job because he doesn't give up on himself. When you give up on yourself, it is very easy for you to live life disappointed. Because giving up on yourself is really the only failure that you ever will have in life. Just because you didn't get dealt the hand that you like doesn't mean that you give up. I mean, I played Uno last night with my son. And Uno, you know, they got these new cards. And the card that they have is called the swap hands card. So here I am thinking I'm about to whoop up on my little 5-year-old son. I say, Uno. He drops his card, swap hands. Dude had about 10 cards in his hand. But guess what? They were in my hand. So just because you were dealt a deck of cards that you didn't like doesn't mean that swap hands never happened. Because you could be low one time and a new manager comes in and you get put in a new position. Or you could be in a high position one time and a new manager comes in and you get put in a low position. That doesn't mean that you give up. I see coach after coach after coach in the NFL get fired. And guess what? They just go to another team. I've seen head coaches get fired because they're not great head coaches. Guess what they become? Offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, because they believe in themselves and they find a position. Coaches that don't succeed in the NFL, guess what they do? They go to college football. They don't succeed in college football. They go to high school football. They believe in themselves. They do everything they know to do to be successful because they don't give up. They don't give in. Don't give in. Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't give up. And that's why I stay in this word. Because when I feel like giving up, I realize that God never gave up on me. He never gave up on me. It would have been very easy for him to say, guess what? This dude is not worth it. But when you read the word and you study the word, you realize that God has already given his life. He's not getting back off the cross and getting back up on the cross. He already gave his life. So whatever you've done wrong, you've been forgiven. If you forgive yourself. The greatest challenge that we'll ever face is forgiving ourselves. We don't forgive ourselves for our shortcomings. We don't forgive ourselves for our downfalls. We don't give ourselves for our mishaps. And because we don't forgive ourselves, we never move forward. You can move forward because God has positioned you to move forward. God has already forgiven you. God has already looked past your falls and your faults. It's your friends and families that don't look past your flaws and your faults. It's the mirror, hey Sandy, that causes you to see imperfection. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. You're beautiful the way you are. You don't need to dye your hair. You don't need to lose another pound. You don't need to whiten your teeth. You don't need to fix the gap in your teeth. Look at Michael Strahan. Dude got the biggest gap in the world. No offense, Strahan. He's popping on every television station because he was fine with who he was. You got to learn that who God has called you to be, what God has made you, is enough. There's a guy that plays football for Florida. He's now in the NFL. Dude had one hand and he's in the league because he didn't give up on himself. Because he knew that being second, not having a hand, was not a stumbling block. The only stumbling block is in between your two ears. Never give up. Never give in. Keep holding on. You can lose and still win. You can go through adversity and still win. Because he's the God in the valley. He's the God in the mountain. He's the God in the valley. He's the same God in the mountain. And if you're in the valley, pray, get out the valley, get back on the mountain. But guess what? Every mountaintop experience will have a valley. We can't stay up top forever. Sometimes you're going to come down. But when you come down, it doesn't mean that you're not great. If you don't like where you're going, chart a new course. It really is that simple. If you don't like where you're going, if you don't like what you have, just chart a new course. Chart a new course is not always easy. But guess what? We wouldn't be here in America if someone didn't chart a new course. We wouldn't be in America. I wouldn't be able to talk today if people just gave up. If people just gave up and said, this country wasn't worth fighting for. Our freedoms wasn't worth fighting for. Our liberties wasn't worth fighting for. If you give up at the first sign of adversity, it just really means that you didn't want it bad enough. That's why I keep staying in the Word, because God reminds me. He endured the cross for me. He endured every backlashing for me. He endured betrayal for me. If he did all of that for me, I'm not going to ever give up on him. And that's why I shout him out from the mountaintops. That's why I shout him out every Thursday. That's why I shout him out all the time. Because he's been too good to me. So even when a door has been shut, I trust that God will open another door. Because I don't believe that God would ever leave me. Even when you're not prepared, it doesn't mean that you're not able to be king. David was called to be king when he was a kid. He wasn't prepared to be king. He had to learn how to be king. He had to learn how to be king. Moses. Yeah, Moses. He went down to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. But guess what? Moses wasn't prepared. He had to go away on the backside of a desert. Not being prepared doesn't mean that you won't ever be anything. God works best in dysfunctional people. He really does. God works best in people that don't fit the mold, because he does it for his glory. If I told you there's a dude that got like $1 million in the bank and that he's successful, you would say, well, it's because of the silver spoon in his mouth. But if you see the dude that was homeless on the side of the road and now he owns a chain of restaurants, you would say it's nothing but God. See, you're the greatest lie that I think is out there, that you have to be perfect, that all your ducks got to be in a row. God just needs your faith. God just needs your willingness. God just needs your willingness to do something, to trust in him, and trust that what he made you, what he designed in you is perfect. So if you have a lisp, it's okay. It's okay if you have a lisp. It's okay if you have a receding hairline. That has nothing to do with your greatness. It's okay if you're gray head. It's okay if you're big. It's okay. It's okay if you're short. God used short people. He used short people. He used tall people. He used heavy people. He's used skinny people. He used old people. He used young people. There hasn't been a group of people or a type of individual that I've seen that God has not used, because it is not your own ability. He said that in your weakness, he is made strong. When you work with God, you're always at 100. When you work with God, you will always be at 100, because what you lack, God has. What you lack, God has. And God is not coming down physically and giving you some things, but he will put you in places to connect with people, to complete you, to round you out. to help you be and help you go where you need to go. But it all starts with a belief that I'm enough. So even though I wasn't the first choice, I still can be successful. Even if I was the last pick on the team, I still can be a starter. Your work ethic and your desire will take you a long place in life. Laziness leads to poverty. Laziness leads to poverty. I don't care what color you are, what nationality you are, what ethnicity you are. Laziness will lead to poverty. If you're too lazy to get up and apply the gifts and talents that God gave you, you will never be successful. One thing you got to know. What's up, Mr. Hunter? One thing you got to know. A no isn't always a no. Sometimes it's just not yet. A no isn't always a no. Sometimes it's just not yet. Sometimes some of the things that you have on the inside of you, the people around you just ain't ready for it. The people just can't see it. It's too big for them. Most people will hamper your dream because their heart has been broken. Most people will hamper your dream because their dream has never been actualized and realized. Most people will hamper your dream because they didn't understand that no isn't no, that sometimes it's just not yet. Never give up on what God's told you. Never give up on what God's told you. And if you weren't the first one to get there, guess what? It's okay. Because when you get on the scene, you will be enough. You will be blessed to be a blessing. I just want to encourage you that you are truly blessed to be a blessing. And being second is okay. Because God wasn't first on the scene. There was another Adam before him. He wasn't even the first high priest. There was another priest before him. Aaron came out of the line of priests. He wasn't the first. Abram. He had a child that the tribe of Israel came out of. That wasn't the first child that he had. That wasn't the first out of his loins. So your first idea may not always work right. But it doesn't mean that you give up. You may not be first option, but that doesn't mean that God won't bless you. Because if you look at, and I know some people may not be in the Bible this way, but just trust me. David was anointed king. But David wasn't even Saul's son. He wasn't even Saul's flesh and blood. That thing should have belonged to Jonathan. If you don't know those people, just Google David, Jonathan, and Samuel. And Saul. Saul had a son, Jonathan. But Jonathan wasn't king. David wasn't even related to this dude. And he became king. So the point I'm making is, your father doesn't have to be king for you to become king. You don't have to be the son of royalty to be royal. You just got to believe that you're royal. You just got to carry yourself that you're royal. And you just got to trust God will put you in places and positions that you can be elevated. We don't do this to be elevated. We do this because this is my worship to my Creator, to give him back the things that he's given me. So God has blessed me with some things to give to the people. Guess what? You should take the gifts and talents that God has given you and give it back to the people. Because when you do, when you walk in the vocation that God has called you in, the possibilities are endless. There's no limit to what you can do when you believe in you. No isn't no. It's just not yet. So that's why I go to church. That's why I dive into scriptures. Because God has shown me I don't have to be first to be great. Sometimes second is okay. I don't have to always be prepared. I don't always have to be qualified. But God will always qualify who he called. So just get started. Whatever God has told you to do, whatever aspirations that you have, just know they can be accomplished because it is God that works in you to do his good pleasure. And he said, beloved, above all, I wish that you will prosper and be in health. That's even as your soul prosper. That's your mind, will, and emotions. So if you're in an unstable place, pray and ask God to bring clarity. He can give clarity to everything. You might not get it right away, but be persistent. Because most people, thank you, Sandy. Most people think that there is an overnight success. None of us, any of us, have ever been made great overnight. We became great because we were persistent and we were consistent and we never gave up on our hopes and dreams. This is Michael Gibson, and that's why I go to church. If this message blessed you, share it out. Thank you for everybody that tuned in. Have a good Thursday.